It is extraordinary that in 2022, Joe Biden published a strategy for world domination. Let's call it what it is, okay? Joe Biden had a strategy for world domination, and it was published as a PDF on the internet for all to see, for his enemies in China to see, for his enemies in Russia to see, for journalists and members of the general public to see. Now, generally, when countries have a strategy for the domination of a particular region, or domination of a continent, or domination of the whole world, they will not actually publish it. Most periods in the history of the United States of America, the president has not published his grand strategy if he had one. And sometimes presidents of the United States have engaged in any number of wars with really no strategy at all. What was Donald Trump's strategy in Iran? What was Donald Trump's strategy in Afghanistan? What was Donald Trump's strategy for Israel? Now, if you get outside of that, what was Donald Trump's strategy for the future of North Africa? I mean, like, I can imagine there were probably these, foreign policy wonks sitting there in the State Department, sitting there in the NSA, sitting there at the CIA, sitting there at the Pentagon. They're actively involved in ongoing wars in North Africa during the 4 years of the Trump presidency. They're like, what's this guy going to do next? What is the strategy here, right? Generally speaking, a strategy of this kind will be secret. It will be covert. It will be implicit in the actions of a country. So I don't have to go into this at great length, but you may or may not know that right now, France is engaged in quite a number of ongoing wars in North Africa. Quite a few different offensives, quite a few different armed interventions in North Africa that France is engaged in. What is France's strategy? Perhaps it's an exaggeration to say nobody knows, all right? But there isn't a simple PDF you can download that's going to tell you what that strategy is. To a very large extent, it is secret. Now, I think the British government is another very good example of this. Can anyone make a list of how many war and insurgencies ongoing around the world the British government is engaged in? And there's no strategy. Now, so we're looking at here the prospect of, or the reality of, Joe Biden stating openly what no other president would say openly, or you can regard this as a kind of, quote unquote, false flag operation. I know it's an overused term. I know it's associated with conspiracy theorists, but what if in this document, Joe Biden is telling you the exact opposite of what he's actually going to do? Have you heard of this guy, Vladimir Putin? Have you heard about this? In case you think false flag operations don't work, in case you think misinformation put out by governments about military operations don't work, this guy, Vladimir Putin, maybe you've heard of him, he managed to deceive the whole world into thinking he was just having peaceful military exercises right next to the border of Ukraine, right? Right up until the day he invaded. Now, Joe Biden didn't believe it. Joe Biden was the one voice saying, no, this is an armed invasion of Ukraine. These are preparations for, this is war materiel for, these are munitions for, ordnance for an upcoming imminent invasion of Ukraine. The director of the United Nations didn't believe Joe Biden. Right up until the day of the invasion, you had the fucking director of the United States saying, no, come on. These are just military exercises. Listen to Putin. Believe Putin. It's perfectly credible. He's having these peaceful exercises right on the Ukrainian border. There's nothing to be concerned about. That's a professional career politician, foreign policy expert who was fooled, who was taken in by this right until the troops crossed the line, right until the red hot bullets were ready to fly. Okay. He wasn't the only one, right? Prime Minister of France, President of France, the Prime Minister of Germany, the leaders of, I think, every single European country did not take Joe Biden's warning seriously. And it wasn't even a warning. Joe Biden just stated as a matter of fact, again and again and again, within the next few weeks, Vladimir Putin is going to invade. So from memory, he said it for about a month and a half. It wasn't, but he was saying within a few weeks. He didn't know exactly the date, but he said, yes, before we get to the middle of March, there's going to be this invasion. Nobody wanted to hear it. So if you think lying is not a viable strategy, we've just lived through seeing how incredibly effective, how devastating in times of both peace and war, a simple lie can be to your enemies. Now, great comment from the audience. Do you want to give me a kiss? Says, quote, there is no exercise or maneuver for which you need 200,000 troops. Well, I just say briefly, without getting into this in great detail, to me, the great joke is that the tangible evidence Joe Biden was working with is simply satellite photography. Now, to some extent, we still use airplanes rather than satellites. It's the same thing in terms of looking at it on a table, whether the photograph was taken by an airplane or a satellite. It's aerial photography, it's overhead photography. So it's very different from relying on a handwritten note from a spy 200 years ago. You have someone who's infiltrated the enemy side and who's telling you, look, this is what people are talking about in this army camp, interpreting rumor and innuendo. You're looking at a photograph of war material. You're looking at exactly where it's being transported to and where it's being transported from. It's generally what you're talking about here, very palpable, hard facts. Now, those facts are still open to interpretation. But yes, it is just ludicrous. It is just laughable that Joe Biden was the one lone voice of reason leading up to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, all evidence to this point indicates that Xi Jinping, that the elite level of the Chinese Communist Party, that they were also fooled, that they did not know about this. So now, maybe in the next 10 years or something, more information will come out indicating that no, there actually was a knowledge at the elite level of the Chinese government about what China was going to do next. But at this time, all evidence is that the government of China did not know about and did not agree to supporting Putin, shall we say, escalating the conflict in Ukraine, because the conflict had already existed since 2014. It wasn't really a new war or a new invasion, but it was certainly a sudden escalation of hostility. So if you think about the foreign policy implications of Putin managing to cement this strategic agreement with China, which is partly an economic agreement, it's partly a trade agreement, it's partly an investment agreement, there were many facets to the cooperation between Russia and China. He managed to lock that down and then go shake hands with Xi Jinping in Beijing at the Olympics, and then days later, go to war. You think lying isn't effective in politics? So look, we have two possibilities here. One is that Joe Biden has put his cards on the table for everyone to see exactly what his strategy is, frankly, for world domination. And another is that this is a lie. And actually what Joe Biden is going to do is the exact opposite. What Kamala Harris is going to do is the exact opposite, is that this is an attempt to manipulate various world leaders. Now, I don't think it was intentional that this document was buried by the news about the war in Ukraine. I don't think, they intentionally released it at a time when it would be ignored by the mainstream media. I think this was published as soon as they could agree on all the details and publish it. It would have made sense for it to be published, say, a few months earlier, even just 1 month earlier. It would have made more of an impact. But I can tell you, Melissa and I, we've listened to the Communist Party of China's response to this. Oh, this had a big impact in China. And I certainly, elite level of government in India, other countries in Asia will have received this message, and they will be taking it very, very seriously. And how they will respond to it, one way or another, time will tell. Joe Biden has said again and again, from Alpha to Omega, that he will not in any way militarily engage the Russians. That could also be a lie. Right? He's capable of doing the same kind of trickery Putin's been doing. All right? Just keep that in mind. All right? Joe Biden could say there's no way he's going to escalate this conflict. There's no way he's going to escalate this conflict. And then one day he pushes the buttons and missiles launch out of silos. And I just want to emphasize, asymmetrical warfare is an option on the table. Various things will come to mind when I say asymmetrical warfare for you. Probably the first image that comes to mind, if you're into politics, if you're into political science, whatever you want to say, probably the first image that comes to mind is responding through guerrilla warfare or covert ops. That's not the only kind of asymmetrical warfare there is. You can respond to Russia invading Ukraine by instead conquering Belarus. That's asymmetrical. You don't fight on the same front. You don't, right? It's an option. You could say, oh, well, we support the democratically elected government of Belarus that was snuffed out and kicked out by the current corrupt regime. I don't know if you remember that. That hasn't been in the news for a few months now, but there was this tear-jerking, headline-grabbing story about Belarusian democracy being choked out of existence by the horrible government they've got there. Well, it's not too late to have a military intervention in Belarus in the name of democracy, right? Joe Biden can do that tomorrow. He can do it anytime. And he can wait until public horror at what Russia is doing in Ukraine is so great that nobody is going to mind if he even uses nuclear arms to settle this. Like, he can wait until it reaches a point. You can lie. This is politics. It's politics, baby. You can, you want to talk about asymmetrical warfare? Russia has a number of weaknesses on their frontier. Really great asymmetrical response Joe Biden could do right now. Mongolia has an enormous undefended border with Russia. There is no buffer state. Mongolia has an enormous undefended border with the People's Republic of China, with Communist China. Mongolia has for years wanted to be in a military alliance with both Japan and the United States. They want to be a democracy on the pro-democracy team. Because America was in the totally hypocritical position of trying to maintain a military alliance with China, a strategic alliance with China, again, in large part economic, America has always stepped back. And to my knowledge, they've always told Japan to step back. I remember Abe Shinzo briefly talked about getting into an alliance with Mongolia. And right away, everyone, including most obviously, most loudly China, said, no, 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 no. If you set foot in Mongolia, there will be hell to pay. Well, right now would be a great time for America to sign a treaty with Mongolia. And if you had just one detachment of the U.S. Marine Corps in Mongolia, it's just purely symbolic presence, setting up a tiny base with a little airplane landing strip, doing training exercises for the Mongolian military, that would still be sufficient to say, look, guys, when you color in the map, this country is on the American side. And guess what? We can fill it up with missiles. We can fill it up with whatever we want. This would be a thorn in the side of Russia and a thorn in the side of Communist China simultaneously. And this will cost America nothing. I mean, sorry, you wasted trillions on Afghanistan. Military alliance with Mongolia cost you a few bucks. This would be a bargain basement, devastating move. This is asymmetrical warfare. And what are you going to say? I mean, again, for the American people, come and get it. What do you want? You want to conquer Mongolia? You want to do that too? Really, bro? Okay, so now you want to extend war in Ukraine to being a war for the conquest of Mongolia? And if so, you can imagine how that would escalate. Because in case you didn't know, actually deep down inside, Russia and China hate each other deeply. And if Russia is invading Mongolia, the Chinese are going to respond by saying, no, you don't. And they're going to try to invade Mongolia also. Seriously, that would be the end of the Russian-Chinese alliance. That would be the end of it. They would immediately become bitter blood enemies. And in case you didn't know, from China's perspective, Mongolia has the same status as Taiwan. It used to be a part of China, and now it's a breakaway state. From the elite level of the Chinese Communist Party, that is their perspective. And by the way, that's not totally fictional. I mean, historically, you can get, it's not as ridiculous as, I don't know, it's not as ridiculous as claiming that, Italy used to be a borough of New York City or something. There are real historical reasons for why the Chinese would feel that way and see it that way. Okay, asymmetrical warfare. All right, just give you a third example. What country is the closest to Japan? When you think about Japan's borders, what is the closest foreign country to Japan? Many of you will say, Korea? Some of you might think Taiwan. You get down to those funny islands in the south. Some of you might think the Philippines. Oh, gee, what's the closest? And obviously some people might guess mainland China. And all of those guesses would be wrong. The country with the closest international frontier to Japan is Russia. And they are at war right now, literally. Russia and Japan never signed a peace treaty. They still have disputed territories. The border was never settled. Okay. There is still on paper an ongoing war between Russia and Japan. That's a weakness. That's a weakness America can exploit. Right? Asymmetrical war. Oh, you invade Ukraine. Well, we have a legal pretext to invade and conquer a portion of Siberia, basically, however you want to put it. We can conquer Sakhalin Island. We can conquer the four smaller islands. The Japanese call them the Kuril Islands. I say the greater Karafuto area. We can cut off a piece of Russia, right? Now, if you're a cheapskate, let's say America doesn't even bother occupying it, right? You could just set off missiles and blow up the oil rigs. Devastating to Russia. You can just destroy the roads with missiles. Devastating. You can destroy the electricity. Right? The point is, if you want to do it cheap, if you want to do it low cost, there are options. And you can, I'm sorry, we never recognized this as Russian territory. We're not invading Russia. It's asymmetrical warfare. You know, the same way Russia refused to recognize that Crimea is legally a part of Ukraine, we didn't recognize this fucking island north of Japan as a legitimate part of Russian territory. And guess what? You guys never signed a treaty at the end of World War II that would make it a legitimate part of Russia rather than Japan. So, okay, asymmetrical warfare. And if you want to, you can use nukes in any of these conflicts. Okay? Joe Biden's got options. All right, I'm going to close out the part of the video where we're talking about Ukraine. In a sense, this is only an allegory for what I really want to get into, which is Joe Biden's secret strategy for world domination, the good and the bad of it. It's really important that you don't demonize the opposite side in politics. If the other side that you're struggling against were entirely evil, it would be easy to overcome. Recognizing that your opponents are a mix of good and evil, recognizing that the strategy you disagree with has advantages as well as disadvantages is crucial to having a mature, nuanced, useful political mindset. All right. If you want to change the world, you have to start with a profound acceptance that what the other side is offering is in some ways good, even if what you are preoccupied with is the evil. All right. When you're up against an enemy that is entirely evil, or if you think of them as entirely evil, then there is no onus upon you to actually come up with a better idea, with a better model for how to run a country or a better way to organize the continent you're talking about, whatever the geopolitical situation is. When you recognize, like, I hate these guys, these people are my enemy, but some things they're doing really work. Like there's some things that are effective. There's some things that are good about their regime, their republic, their empire, whatever it is we're criticizing. As soon as you recognize that, now there's an onus on you to do better. So, okay, well, what's my idea for how this country should be ruled or how this region should be governed, whatever it is? What's my idea that's really better than what they've already got? George W. Bush was an incredibly stupid man. If you're trying to make a list of the stupidest presidents of the United States in history, I know today everyone's going to say it's Donald Trump. There's an argument George W. Bush was really stupider than Donald Trump. But it's tough. It's a tough race to the bottom 10 stupidest presidents in the history of the United States. And some of the early guys, some of the guys who were alive, the founding fathers, some of those guys were really stupid too when you get into history. All right. George W. Bush had the mentality that Saddam Hussein was a terrible dictator, that his government was a terrible regime, that it was all evil, and that therefore the only thing he needed to do was to liberate these people from the evil regime, and whatever political arrangements ensued would be better. A nuanced, mature perspective, an analysis that's actually useful, has to begin by recognizing there are some things Saddam Hussein is doing right. There are some ways in which his regime works. There are some ways in which it's good. And we have to really understand that, because if we destroy that regime, if we just oppose it effectively, right, then you're pulling out those linchpins. I shouldn't even say just clothespins. If you imagine laundry hanging in the wind, right? You have laundry. You're pulling out some clothespins here. There are some things that hold this society together, and you're removing them, and you better have something better to replace this. You better be able to rush out and put in your own clothespin. There was none of this mentality. There was no mature, nuanced understanding on George W. Bush's side, right? This was just the idiocy of thinking you could destroy the Saddam Hussein regime, and then whatever eventuated, really with no effort on the American side at all, would be better, right? Now, again, Saddam Hussein, terrible person, terrible regime. But I think you can see why it's really important to appreciate what those regimes are doing right. So obviously, one strength of the Saddam Hussein regime is that it completely suppressed the conflict between Sunni and Shiite within Iraq, right? And as soon as you pulled out those clothespins, you basically got a low-level civil war for the extent to which the Sunni or the Shiite side would control the capital city. Region by region, it's a little different. It's not the same up in Kurdistan, the Kurdish area. But generally, we're talking about the most important parts of Iraq. There was a struggle, partly a political struggle, but partly an armed struggle for who was going to control the fate of the country. Would it be Sunni or Shiite? Right now, and that involves Iran and its proxy armies and its support for one side or the other. Another example would be the oil industry, which is kind of important in Iraq. Saddam Hussein, he had effective control over the oil industry. As soon as the Americans got involved, in effect, nobody had control over the oil industry. It devolved into a kind of gangsterism or warlordism. All right. Kind of a big deal. And I've said this in earlier videos. There's a real option I think explored in the Donald Trump presidency. Nothing came of it. There is an option to embrace the Putin regime and say, okay, some things about this are evil. Some things about this could work out for the best long term. I would compare that to, here's a topical comparison for you. Who was ruling Spain during World War II? Anyone remember that? What was the government of Spain during World War II? Yeah, it was a fascist dictatorship that was also America's ally. And that continued after World War II. Right? Now, some of you may not believe me. You might think, oh, no, that's not true. Spain was ruled by the Phalangist regime. There's some political science vocabulary, and they were allied with the Nazis. If you look into it, if you do the reading, no, in fact, from their perspective, their alliance, secret alliance, was with the British. And then indirectly from the British to the Americans, because the British and the Americans were on the same side throughout World War II, but the British began the war much earlier. The United States enters World War II much later than England. So from their perspective, and from the perspective of the dictator himself, Franco, that was the strategic alliance he made. And he very much assumed Spain was arming itself to fight against the Germans. Now, I know surface level, that's not obvious in World War II, but that is what really happened. I've researched it and I've written an essay about it. And that is what explains the strange fact that after World War II ends, America is in no way asking for Spain to make a transition to democracy. There's no punishment put on Spain this way. There's no forcing them to no forcing them to change government in the way that America forced Italy to change its government, right? The United States and the Western powers, they basically forced Italy to become a normal democracy, what do you want to say, a parliamentary style democracy. This didn't happen, okay? There is a completely Machiavellian perspective to be had that you can embrace Russia 100%. And I think I've already outlined for you, there's also a completely Machiavellian perspective. You say, hey, this is our opportunity to go into Mongolia, heavy. This is our opportunity to go into northern Japan, heavy. Even this is our opportunity to stand up in front of the Japanese people, stand up in front of the Japanese parliament, the Diet, and say, Japan, rip up your constitution and write a new one. You guys committed to never having an army ever again. Well, those days are past. You need an army now. You need an army forever. You need to be prepared to go to war with Russia, your closest neighbor, a country you're still at war with, you still have a border dispute with. Some result. I mean, America, you know what I'm saying? This could be the opportunity to rearm, to remilitarize Japan as never before in a context where that makes sense. This can be the opportunity for Joe Biden or Kamala Harris to go to Berlin and say, people of Germany, you have a pacifist constitution. You have basically an anti-military constitution, not quite as extreme as Japan's commitment to not having any army ever again. Well, guess what? Those days are over. All right. You need to write an amendment to your constitution. You need to have a real army that's capable of real military intervention, not this bullshit you're doing right now with Ukraine. You need to be ready to fight the Russians now and forever. This is a turning point in your history. Okay, so these are, like, they're both Machiavellian. Embracing Russia would be Machiavellian. Opposing Russia would be Machiavellian. And I heard a brilliant insight from a real specialist in Israel, an Israeli guy who used to be in military intelligence, and now he's a journalist. But this is just the kind of insight that true experts have that an outsider or an amateur wouldn't have. It's not really secret, but who else would know this? He said, oh no, what Israel's doing right now is they're taking advantage of basically Russia's new status as a pariah nation. They're taking advantage of it to massively expand Israeli operations within Syria. This is Israeli covert ops, Israeli military policy area. That until now, or for several years until now, Israel had remained somewhat aloof and distant from Syria because the Russian army was there, and the attitude was, okay, we don't want to fight against the Russians. We don't want to cause friction with Russia. We want to kind of respect Russia's sphere of influence, and Russia is doing its thing to stabilize the region and end the conflict, right? But now Israel has a changed attitude. Oh, okay, now we can go in and we can, I mean, ultimately, sorry, this involves killing people. Now they have the attitude they can kill as many Russians as they need to bring about their own policy goals in Syria. So that's the kind of change that, see, it's asymmetrical. Israel is not going to respond to this by deploying tanks to the Donbass in Ukraine. Israel is not going to respond to this by directly sending in paratroopers to Kiev. But there are other fronts for the Russian Empire that are very much ongoing. So guys, I'm now going to pause. That's kind of the end of the Ukraine-Russia portion of this. They might get mentioned, but we're going to move on to Joe Biden's grand strategy for planet Earth, planet America. This is a great time to make a comment if you want me to actually read and respond to it. It's also a great time to hit the thumbs up button. We have 39 people in the audience. I appreciate you being here. There's no advance warning. This is a Saturday. Thank you for taking the time to think about politics, think about the future of democracy, think about ongoing wars, and some hypothetical wars soon to come. I mean, really, we've gone back into an era of Cold War politics. And although we've been talking so much about Russia, the other great Cold War right now is China. And the difference is in 2022, Russia and China are on the same side. Whereas back in 1971 and 1972, Russia and China were bitter enemies. They were on opposite sides of the Cold War. Some of you may not know that. Some of you may be tired of hearing me say it. But anyway, we got 39 people in the audience. If we could have 39 thumbs up, that would be great. It will help more people join the conversation. Anyone's welcome to comment. I think you have to have subscribed to the channel for 10 minutes. So if it's your first time ever seeing this channel, you can hit subscribe, and after you've heard me talk for 10 minutes, you can join it and make a big comment also. So, babe, Melissa, my girlfriend, is just off camera here. It's a good moment for the audience to say whatever's on their mind. Is there anything on your mind you want to chime in with? It is an exhaustive and exhausting conversation. It's all right. There's no obligation. Yeah. I mean, the other big overarching topic here is just the absence of democracy in American foreign policy. I made a very brief video a couple days ago. You want to? Okay, sorry. Do it. No. Do it.
You mentioned another Cold War. This is now a new Cold War. Do you really think that there was a stop to the Cold War? This kind of political.
Yes. Yeah. Good question. My answer is actually yes. I think there was a sincere period of American-Russian cooperation, and you could say that it ended the moment Putin came into power, but I would say it probably ended a couple years after Putin came into power, because when Putin first came into power, there was still some Western optimism about Vladimir Putin. I think you can actually see Western optimism about Russia displayed graphically if you look up the exchange rate of the Russian ruble to the US dollar, and decade by decade, year by year, how the value of the Russian ruble keeps declining. And by the way, it just declined dramatically again. So I quoted that to you. I don't have the numbers memorized. Like, okay, so at this point, one US dollar is worth 40 Russian rubles. And then things get worse, and it's 60 Russian rubles. Then it's 80 Russian rubles. And now one US dollar will buy you more than 100 Russian rubles. It is just a coincidence. But Western optimism, Western really here meaning America plus Western Europe, optimism about Russia, it's gotten worse and worse. But no, I think the reason why I'd say that so confidently was just that I was alive at that time. Prior to Vladimir Putin taking over the government of Russia, there was real optimism that, that Russia would become a normal country, that this was something. And so another sign of that, I remember this around, say, 1995, Western universities used to be full of Russian people coming over to study in Canada and the United States and so on, as never before. I do not know how many Americans went to study in Russia. There was this brief period when the Russian secret archives, including their intelligence archives, military archives, were open to Western scholars, Western researchers and historians going and looking at what had been secret just a few years before about how communism actually worked and secret killings. So no, there was, I think, a legitimate period of positivity when you could say the Cold War was over. And look, I used to live in Laos. I used to live in Cambodia. It would have been in places like that where you felt most dramatically the end of that Cold War. Because up until a certain point, there was a struggle between the Russians and the Americans for who would influence these countries the most. And then it just stopped. So that, I just say, if you're in these peripheral spaces that had been contested in the Cold War, that in the Cold War people were struggling to influence, there you would have felt most dramatically when it stopped. Yeah. And I think it can be asked, now if you live in any of those places, including Athens, Greece, what you're aware of is very much the Cold War between China and the Western world. To what extent does China control Thailand? To what extent does China control Cambodia, Laos, etc.? But even to what extent does China control the Piraeus harbor in Greece compared to what that's the major conflict. But yeah, there's a little bit with Russia too. There's a little bit of that kind of tension. So this is what we're getting into now. We're moving beyond the Ukraine front lines to get into really global domination, the whole rest of the world. I was just going to mention the other big theme here is the question to what extent there's any democracy at all when it comes to foreign policy and elite level geopolitics. So you want to say something about that?
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, you've been talking about this madman leader, and a lot of people are calling Putin this.
Yes, right.
Referring to him as a madman. It's it's just really true that when we were living through the Trump presidency, I think everybody was on the edge of their seat or kind of biting their nails. What terrible decision is Donald Trump going to be in charge of? And it turns out that, more of the, maybe it's because I'm living through it right now, but it does seem to me that currently this is taking hold of people in a way that nothing during the Trump presidency did.
Yeah.
That this invasion of Ukraine is really capturing people's attention more so than Trump's brief
Yes.
with
Right.
Iran,
Right.
So it's just still it wants to emphasize that we have no democratic process in this. Like,
Right.
we do not have a choice in choosing whether we will engage in a military conflict.
So let me give some smaller examples that are ongoing right now, like today, this week. So it has been proposed that America could be in a strategic partnership with, a military alliance with Finland. Why don't you have a fucking vote on that in the United States of America? Why don't you have a referendum? That may seem like a small deal. It's not. Look at a map. Look where Finland is, right? So I've set out for you guys a number of options. Asymmetrical warfare. That's another way. You can put nuclear missiles in Finland if you want to. Fill up Finland with missile silos. Canada still is. We still have missiles in Canada that are aimed at Russia from the Cold War. We still got them. How many is a secret. We don't know. But obviously Finland is more strategically located for that. If you want, again, put one detachment of the U.S. Marine Corps in Finland. Okay, isn't that a decision the American people could make? And I think it would be very interesting to put it to a direct vote, a direct referendum in the United States of America. Do you want to accept Mongolia? A treaty with Mongolia, a partnership with Mongolia. And again, it's not a war. Like right now, Mongolia doesn't have a war. But it entails that if in the future Mongolia has certain kinds of problems, you're gonna back up Mongolia. And a lot of people in America, they've barely heard of Mongolia. They've heard of it in jokes on South Park. The TV show South Park used to make a lot of jokes about Mongolia, building the city wall to keep out the Mongolians. So, some of you know what I'm talking about, some of you don't. But like Mongolia, Americans would wake up and think of, okay, this is a decision to make. And you know what? If Americans said no, if Americans made the decision, you know what? Mongolia doesn't deserve our protection. They don't deserve to be in this alliance with us or what have you. Then later on, they would be able to think about and reflect on the consequences of that. And they'd be able to hear their political leaders saying, like, maybe just a few years down the road, the conflict with China is getting worse. And there were people in the Senate or people in Congress pointing the finger and saying, look, you guys made the wrong decision about Mongolia. I told you this was a crucial strategic partnership and we should put boots on the ground in Mongolia. And now look, and American people would be involved. Notice I'm saying involved. I'm not saying these people are brilliant. I'm not saying they're intelligent. But you'd start to get an escalating level of political education, escalating level of political involvement, and of moral commitment to dealing with the outcomes of the wars that are ongoing, as opposed to feeling that there is this technocratic class in Washington, D.C. There is this elite level of government that you can't see and can't touch and can't understand, and they're taking care of everything for you. They're making the decisions on your behalf, and it has nothing to do with you, and you don't deal with the consequences. So I'm just raising this. Melissa is raising the very general question of, why don't the American people have any say in whether or not we go to war with Russia? And symmetrically, in case you hadn't noticed, the people of Russia have no say in whether or not Russia goes to war with Ukraine.
Exactly, yes. A lot of what I'm seeing online is that nobody in Russia is supporting this war. And in the United States, everybody is saying, stop the war. It's 2022. It's current year. Why are we having war still?
Right.
As though there haven't been military conflicts going on for the past 20 years. We've all just been going to the shopping mall or,
right. But that disengagement is part of what makes it so sickening. We're going,
yes, exactly. And what is the alternative? Okay, so if we don't want war, are we just going to let Russia take Ukraine? What is the option here? Inaction?
Yeah, right. Well, no, and look, I just say, like, I'm actually open to the whole range of possibilities, but I'd feel differently about it if there were a vote on it. Like, I mean, you could have a vote, and hypothetically, the American people decide, you know what? Ukraine always was part of Russia. Like you could have a vote where the American people say, hey, let them become a province of Russia. That could, right now in 2022, I don't believe that would happen at all. I think way more than 50% of Americans would say, no, we should fight for the future of Ukrainian democracy. Whether that's wise or foolish, if my point being, if there were more democracy, you would get this escalating level of public engagement, public responsibility, and of political education. Right now, why should Americans educate themselves? So one of the examples Melissa referred to very briefly, it was in there for half a sentence, was Donald Trump kind of sort of starting a war with Iran. Now, I remember the mood in America at that time. Politically, even the right wing in America was just so exhausted and so fed up with the war in Afghanistan, the war against ISIS, the war in Syria, and like the low-level civil war within Iraq. They were just like, no. Nobody on the left, nobody on the right, nobody in the center, nobody wanted to start a new war with Iran. Well, Donald Trump did. And guess what? You have a system of government where just one man makes all those decisions, like a king, as an elected monarch. I just want to mention, some of you may have seen the video. Some of you may have played it in the background while washing the dishes and not gotten the point because you didn't actually see the text that was on screen. But I have a 2-minute long video that makes this argument, I believe, powerfully and somewhat artistically. It's a slightly surreal, slightly Dadaistic video. If you don't know what Dadaism is, you can Google that too. But this video in 2 minutes makes the point, I think, powerfully. The American people have never voted on the beginning or ending of any war. There has never been a direct vote. There has never been a referendum on whether or not America should start a war or whether or not America should finish a war, should end a war. That's not how the Vietnam War started. It's not how the Vietnam War ended. It's not how World War II started. It's not how World War II ended. And these were debates the American people were capable of participating in. Korean War. Like, what the fuck was America's objective in Korea? And, I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that out of an isolationist perspective. But, like, the very simple and fundamental questions of what is the objective of the war? Like, America quit halfway through. In case you didn't know, half of Korea today is North Korea. Did you have a vote about that? Did you have a vote? Well, should we just give up? Should we just let half of Korea be this horrible communist dictatorship? What sense does that make? At one point during the war, America had conquered all of Korea, by the way. And then China entered, and it's a long story. An enormous number of deaths. Good luck. I don't know. Still to this day, can you get an honest estimate of how many Chinese died in the Korean War? And by the way, a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think that the United States and China have never directly fought each other in a war. There's never been direct conflict. Or they think it's never happened in the 20th century or something. There's never been a direct case of the U.S. Army and the Chinese Army going face to face. That's exactly what happened in the Korean War. For the most part, Americans weren't fighting Koreans. They were fighting the Chinese. No offense to the North Koreans, but they were outnumbered by the Chinese to a tremendous extent. And it was Chinese men dying, and it was Chinese airplanes getting shot down. The North Koreans didn't have Air Force and this kind of war material. And Chinese people died of starvation in that war too, by the way. Classic Maoist, Maoist economic management. Great to have you guys all here. If you have a second, please hit the thumbs up button. I'm now going to take the time and read and respond to your comments. It's a good time to make a comment, but say, if you hit thumbs up, it helps more people join the conversation while it's going on. Help people find the video 6 months from now and 6 years from now also. And this is a video that will be fascinating for me to go back and listen to 5 years from now. Whether or not, so this is 2022. Imagine watching this video in 2027. I'm being honest with you. I can't imagine that in 2027, I'm going to watch this video and think, I was wrong. Wow, I sure was misguided. I sure was naive. Maybe in 2027, I'm going to think exactly that. I wish I could tell you. I feel that in this video, I'm taking a risk where years from now in the future, I'll look back and regret the political position. That is truly inconceivable to me. This is one of the advantages to being a nihilist. I don't believe in anything now that I'm going to cease to believe in later. So it's pretty hard for me to see that kind of future regret looking back at it. But yeah, the underlying issue here is that what Russia China and the United States have in common is that their foreign policy is decided by just one man, that there really is no democracy, certainly no direct democracy involved. The United States elects Donald Trump, and then for 4 years, everything in foreign policy, everything in international relations can be decided by one man in one moment. And it can be someone as crazy as Donald Trump. I mean, now in this case, so as I say, this comes back to the first thing I said in the video. Joe Biden has published his strategy, sincerely or insincerely. This could be a formal misinformation campaign. This could be telling you the exact opposite of what he wants to do, but nevertheless, it's causing an impact. So Joe Biden is apparently overtly telling you what his strategy is, but whatever he decides to do, nobody else is involved. It's just Joe Biden and people he handpicks to be his advisors, people who are not elected, people who are the unelected assistants of the EOP, the Executive Office of the President, and he rules like a Roman emperor for 4 years. That's it. Congress. Think Congress has anything to fucking do with it. Oh. Reading your comments now, guys. Yeah, so Wicked Energy says, I mean, this is a nuanced problem in understanding China's position in 2022. Quote, the Chinese just brought up how they were victims of colonialism when blamed for not sanctioning Russia. So yeah, I mean, it's a propaganda nightmare for the Chinese because the Chinese have justified their own foreign policy, domestic policy, and so on by saying that they don't invade anyone. They're not trying to expand. Like the land that they acquired during the Qing dynasty, they intend to hold on to, which includes, Xinjiang, places like that. They're going to hold on to Tibet. They're going to hold on to Xinjiang, but that they're not invading anybody. They're not expanding in any direction. This comes up a lot with the border conflict between China and India. China says, hey, we're not imperialists. We're not trying to expand. We're just trying to hold on to what we've already had for at least a century, blah, blah, blah. So it is true. A huge rationalization of Chinese communism is that it is fundamentally anti-imperialist rather than imperialist. Now, that's a transparent fiction. That is a fiction that is very easy to see through. It's a fiction that it's very easy to perceive it as fictional. Put it that way. And this situation with Russian imperialism, I don't know how you can call it anything else, but Russia really reestablishing this grander empire more overtly than before, that puts the Chinese propaganda discourse into a difficult situation. Now, without digressing into it in great length, to make a list of the smaller Russian imperialist projects from the post-1989 period, this includes Nagorno-Karabakh. How many of these can we do from memory without Googling? It includes quite a number of the Central Asian states, the Turkmenistan, the greater Turkmenistan region. There's special arrangements with that. The Special Eurasian Economic Union. It includes Transnistria, the Transnistrian Republic being carved off from Moldova, which, by the way, is adjacent to and has a land border with Ukraine. It's right there. This is another, So, and again, I'm not, and there's also this small part of Georgia that Russia carved off. So, yes, South Ossetia, not North Ossetia, South Ossetia, right. So there you go, from memory. South Ossetia, Nagorno-Karabakh, the Central Asian republics, there's one other, the former Moldovan region of Transnistria. So Russia has a track record this way. And I am not saying this to demonize the Russians. Each one of those, the Russian perspective is coherent. Like, it's not madness. It's not. And look at a map. Why exactly is Guam part of the United States of America?
Yes, I was just gonna say that.
Great minds think alike. Google Maps, Google it, Guam. Oops, okay, I have a typo there. Anyway, guys, if you don't know what Guam is or where Guam is, Guam is a territory of the United States of America. Indeed, you could Google unincorporated. Well, it's too long. Anyway, that's too much to get into. But if you look at the outer territories, if you look at the Guano Islands ruled by the United States of America, there are a lot of very strange remote islands that are part of the United States of America, Northern Mariana Islands, and so on. Legal status, Northern. Last I heard, they were an unincorporated territory of the United States. Yes. So officially, Northern Mariana Islands became part of the United States in 1986. Just put in that quote. So the United States has its own history, ongoing history this way. So, hey, how about Hawaii? It's an earlier period. It's not the 1980s. The annexation of Hawaii and the places America has annexed, they are not rational in the same way that the creation of Transnistria is rational, or the South Ossetia conflict. Like, again, I'm not. Okay, it comes back to what I said earlier. I'm sorry, probably the most important point I can make in this video is that you should not view the other side as entirely evil. You have to look at it as a mix of good and evil and see what it is they're doing right, what it is they're doing successfully or effectively. And then when you do that, it puts an onus on you to really innovate, to really offer something better from your perspective. What is your solution for the future of Transnistria? It may sound stupid, but it's a real issue. What's your solution for the future of Central Asia? Do you want the work? Do you want France and Germany to start ruling and stabilizing predominantly Muslim Central Asia? Do you think they can do a better job than the Russians do already? And I'm sorry, can I list them off from memory? From in Turkmenistan, Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, there you go. Turkmenistan, in that area. Do you want a more aggressive American policy or French policy or German policy? Do you want to play that stabilizing role in Central Asia that the Russians currently are playing? Can you do that better than Russia? Or do you want to pull out those clothespins? Like you imagine laundry drying. Do you want to pull out those stabilizing clothespins and replace them with nothing? Because if so, you're going to get a situation like ISIS. I can tell you exactly who will take over Central Asia. It's going to be a combination of drug dealing, organized crime, like drug gangs, and Muslim fundamentalists, guerrilla armies, or say terrorist group. That's who can take over. If you remove that strong stabilizing hand of the nominally secular, nominally democratic, states that currently rule Central Asia, working hand in glove with the Russian Empire. That's the reality of what's going on in Central Asia in 2022. So again, it's not all bad. It's bad, but it's a mix of good and evil, and you have to understand that in a nuanced and sophisticated way. That was a long answer to a short comment. And I am answering your comments now, guys. 41 people in the audience. Great to have you here. If you have a second, hit the thumbs up, because it'd be great if we had 41 thumbs up also. Okay, so I think this is a mistake also. An anonymous commenter says, quote, Russia is broke. They have the GDP of Florida. Their nukes need updating. Okay, in terms of military strategy, just looking at the military, you're dead wrong. But Russia has the most effective fighting force in the world. And they just proved it in Syria. They just kicked everyone's asses in Syria with a tiny budget. So if you're talking about the effectiveness per dollar of the military, the Russians are the best in the world. They have an incredibly impressive army on every level. Now, in terms of the poverty of that army and the poverty of Russia as a whole, what do you think your quality of life would be like if you were a soldier in the Russian army? The answer is terrible. Like, just the quality of food and shelter and your quality of life if you were a career soldier in Russia. A further question, what do you think your quality of life would be as a mercenary working for the Russians, directly or indirectly? Because they do also employ these mercenary groups. And to my knowledge, many of the men who join those mercenary groups, they're Russian soldiers who want a higher quality of life, better pay. It's exactly why they end up in those groups. So the poverty is real, but it doesn't mean what you think it means. And sorry, I just mentioned Syria as an example. But I don't know, haven't you noticed they conquered Ukraine in about a day and a half? No, they have a tremendously effective army, and it's ridiculous to underestimate them on that front. And by the way, I was talking about Mongolia before. I have no doubt that Russia could conquer Mongolia, and that's exactly what China is afraid of, and China would counter it. Then you get into a war with China if you spur the Russians to occupy or even extend their power into Mongolia. And that conflict goes on even with the question of who controls the railroad corporations. Whenever the Russians increase their presence in the Mongolian railroads, the Chinese say, hey, they can escalate from their side too. They're very concerned about that, the Chinese, and they have historical reasons to be. As I say, on a deep level, the Chinese and the Russians hate each other. But they are currently united by their shared opposition to Joe Biden. And interestingly, they're united in a way they were not under Donald Trump just a short time ago. So again, sorry, some more kind of ignorance. I just think some of these comments are ignorant, but they're worth responding to. From the same anonymous commenter, quote, "The people who are most dangerous with nuclear weapons are Islamic fundamentalists who are happy to give up their lives for a free trip to heaven and 72 versions," close quote. So you are incorrect. And this was a major factor in the war with ISIS. The Muslim fundamentalists take very seriously their commitment to never using chemical weapons. So you will notice, even though they're tremendously brutal, Muslim fundamentalists don't engage in torture. They will never disfigure the corpse of an enemy who's already killed. They have a series of religious principles they keep in warfare. So, by the way, for example, they will sexually enslave a woman, but they will not rape her until they've gone through the procedure of enslaving her. I know this may sound ridiculous, but it's a religious code of honor. Those guys take that very seriously. And the whole ISIS phenomenon, start to finish, you saw they fought by those rules. So this kind of use of chemical and biological weapons and so on is off the table for them. So in many ways, actually, Muslim fundamentalists are the easiest enemy to deal with. Their faith makes them predictable, and it limits what they're willing to do in war. They fight by a code of honor. So that's, again, obviously, I'm not saying this to insult you, but you are really incorrect, and it shows that you haven't been reading really serious nonfiction about politics in the last few years, because you should know this. No, and as bad as the struggle against ISIS was in many ways, that was never the concern. That was never the problem. ISIS was fighting for a traditional and indeed medieval notion of government. It was not anything, not in any way coming in contact with this kind of nuclear threat, superpower thing. It was not their objective. And no, it's much more plausible that, for example, North Korea would use nuclear weapons to make a point than ISIS or any of those Muslim fundamentalist groups. Anyway, yeah. So I mean, obviously, I'm here talking about the heart of the Muslim world geographically. If you get into Muslims who are in Japan or the Philippines, or Muslims who are in Africa, maybe there are some Muslim fundamentalist groups that are exceptions to this rule because they're highly eccentric Muslim cult groups or something. But no, I'm mentioning this because it's instructive. Interesting comment from a Greek member of the audience. Quote, "The Prime Minister of Greece took the initiative and sent military equipment into Ukraine, a decision that was ruled unconstitutional. He insinuated that if Turkey makes a move, America and NATO will support Greece." So welcome to the crowd, Constantia. Seems the same name as Constantine. Welcome to the crowd. I'm happy to have another Greek in the audience. I've been to Greece recently. I care a lot about Greek politics, and I care a lot about the conflict between Greece and Turkey that seemingly no one else talks about. Now, again, you are incorrect. Oh, and there's another comment from you. Constantia also says, quote, "However, that wasn't the case in Cyprus." Right. So, Constantia, I have said again and again on this YouTube channel that NATO must be abolished and replaced with a new treaty or a new clique, whatever you want to say. And the reason is Turkey. NATO was founded on the premise that both Turkey and Greece would be members. And you could say that this was based on the idealistic American assumption that if Turkey and Greece were together in NATO, peace and brotherhood would emerge between them, that the problems would disappear. And, that was stupid and wrong, but not completely crazy, because you might say, well, Greece and Turkey are both terrified of war with the Soviet Union at that time. So, put them together in this alliance and it'll work out. Obviously, from an American perspective, you could have that attitude towards Cyprus. It's totally false. It's totally immoral. It's also wrong. It didn't work. But that was the American perspective. NATO is a Turkey-centered alliance, all right? The Cuban Missile Crisis happened because America had placed missiles in Turkey aimed at Russia, all right? The early period of NATO, up to and including JFK's presidency, John Kennedy's presidency, and the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was all about Turkey. Now, that may sound crazy, but if you look at a map, and you also have to think about this, in politics, very often the focus of your political activity, what we call in English the bellwether. Sorry, I'm aware many people in the audience, English is not your first language. The bellwether or the watershed, it's the part that you can change. It's the part that's variable, right? And that may be of decisive importance. If you ask the question, well, why was Turkey so important and not France? France is going to support the United States anyway. Nobody has to do anything. There's no real concern that France is going to support the Soviet Union. There's no two ways about it. France can't play both sides. France's commitment is obvious. France was working hand in glove with the United States during World War II, and then, by the way, the very morally disturbing transition to the Vietnam War. If you want to look at what France and the CIA were doing together in those years, whoa. So France, there's no reason for NATO to be used to jockey France into position, or that's not what you're disputing. So, in the same way, like in elections, very often, politicians are focused on a minority in the population who could vote for either party, who could vote either. They're the watershed, they're the bellwether, they're the part that can change. So partly just due to geography, partly due to a variety of military factors, like it's a good place to put missiles if you want them to be able to strike St. Petersburg and Moscow. For many reasons, Turkey was seen to be of tremendous military importance at that time. And you might think, okay, fine, but that's the 1950s and 1960s. Isn't that completely crazy when you get to the 1970s? No. Turkey only increased in value because the United States chose to make an enemy out of India. I've made other videos talking about that. 1971, the United States becomes an enemy of India. It's completely stupid. It's completely crazy. The United States enters into an alliance with China, which is simultaneously an alliance against India and an alliance against Russia. Incredibly stupid. I have no excuse for that. Well, that makes Turkey even more important, right? So I'm sorry, the reality is that basically right up to, say, Donald Trump, America has been insanely pro-Turkey. They've been catering to Turkey. They've been trying to keep Turkey in the pro-American alliance as much as possible. And that is really the reason for the creation of NATO. If Turkey wasn't there, what do you think? What's controversial? You think, West Germany, today it's just Germany. You think West Germany was not going to support America anyway? Talking about the period of time when Germany was divided into two halves. So they'd be like, well, I'm not really sure what side we're on here. Most of these countries don't have a choice. They're desperate to be in that alliance, So, the fulcrum of NATO was Turkey. And now for me, it's very easy to say today in 2022, that makes no sense. It's strategically dumb. It's pragmatically counterproductive, and it's totally immoral. That's my perspective. That's not Joe Biden's perspective. Joe Biden is still pro-Turkey. And that's in the strategy. So, yeah. Anyway, it's sad, it's sickening, it's evil, it's wrong. But if you were really following what happened in the war in Syria, the whole thing was a dance with Turkey, right? And naturally enough, I mean, Syria used to be a part of Turkey. Like, of course it's Turkey's problem. Why is it America's problem? Why should Washington, D.C. rule over Syria? It's ridiculous. Of course. But, if you want to know what's happening in Libya, okay, Turkey is a player, France is a player, Egypt is a player. Turkey is a big, important power in many, many, many of these conflicts. And, I feel that Turkey is really America's enemy, certainly right now in 2022. And we're stuck with a Cold War mentality. I don't think it made sense in the 1950s or 1960s. But even if you accept that this made sense in the 1950s and 1960s, we should admit that it makes no sense today. And so from my perspective, the solution is to completely dissolve NATO and start a new treaty. And right now would be a great time to do it. I mean, if Joe Biden did that now, everyone would sign up because everyone is united by both. I mean, put it this way. Everyone is united by anti-Russia animus right now in a way that they were not united just 6 months ago by anti-China animus. Some countries are anti-China. Australia is very anti-China. Many are not. Many countries they feel they can work with China and make the best of it. And again, I understand why. There's a lot to like about China. There is. I mean, again, it's not all bad. It's not all evil. And sorry, I know this is a long answer to a short question, but it's deep. And I feel not a lot of people know what I know, sadly, about politics. What if I try to argue against my position on Turkey? Right now, America supports Turkey. And America for years supported Turkey in building an oil pipeline that would supply oil to Western Europe to compensate for the reduction of Russian oil exports, a reduction or cessation of Russian oil exports. That's America's grand strategy short term with Turkey. So they're saying to Turkey, hey, if you're on our side, if you stay in the pro-American camp, the pro-NATO camp, you can make millions of dollars out of oil money. This can be your strategic role. So there is an argument, and that is Joe Biden's position. Joe Biden is pro-Turkey. Joe Biden feels that Turkey is crucial to his anti-Russia policy. He probably feels positively about the role Turkey is playing in Syria and North Africa. Probably, or he feels more positive, but he feels that it's fine to let Turkey do its own thing there. So, Joe Biden is in effect pro-Turkey so far. Could change. And Joe Biden doesn't care about the future of democracy in Turkey. Apparently, nobody cares about the future of democracy in Greece or Cyprus, which I think is a totally immoral, inexcusable position. I care, but apparently, Joe Biden doesn't, and Donald Trump didn't either, and the Prime Minister of England doesn't. I have no idea. I have no idea how the British and French and Germans sleep with themselves at night when the situation in Cyprus is what it is. It's so utterly immoral to me, but that's carried on for decades. And I mean, Greece itself, situation is not that much better than Cyprus. They really are in a perpetual state of war with Turkey. You can call it a Cold War. All right, so I'm just taking a moment to read your comments now, guys. So again, a stupid comment, but one worth reading out. Quote, now we have feminism. Perhaps the young women will be conscripted to fight in the next war, close quote. Well, right now, allegedly about 15% of the armed combatants in Ukraine are female. So I'm sorry, but you're just out of date. We had women fighting in, Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on. But I mean, I believe Israel still has the highest percentage of women, in combat, actually in active military duty of any power. But if not, no. I mean, women are fighting in war as never before, and Ukraine itself is a showcase of that. Quote from longtime viewer: "Do you want to give me the kiss?" Asking, is obfuscation always necessary and effective? I mean, look, sorry, it's a good question. Oh, right. Shout out to Abkhazia. Yeah, Abkhazia comes in. Oh, Melissa says she was trying to add Abkhazia to the list. Look, is this strategy obfuscation? Like, we don't know. We do not know. So yeah. Anyway, it's fine. Okay, so Constantina, sorry, that's how I pronounce your name. Constantina comments. We're all over this story. We've known about this for years. Quote: They have already agreed to use the NATO base in Alexandroupoli for potential missile. You are talking to two of the people on Earth who considered moving to Alexandroupoli permanently because of the opening of that base. All right, that's how pro-war we are and how anti-Turkey we are, and so on. We knew about that back when the announcement was made. We went to Athens, and look, I'll be honest with you. Right now, it's still a good idea for us. We, whether you think of it as opening a language school there, because we could teach English, we could teach Chinese, we could have someone teaching Russian. We could have a great language institute in Alexandroupoli. And if you want to, we can be involved in tourism to some extent also. We can open a vegan gym. I'm just being honest, I don't really want to run a vegan restaurant. We could have a gym there or something. We can go build an empire in Alexandroupoli. But Alexandroupoli, partly it's the tourism industry, but it's partly a military town now, and it'll be expanding. But Alexandroupoli, that's a real temptation. But we seriously looked at buying a home in Alexandroupoli. We really considered this. It's colder than you think. Let's look it up right now. It's not that hot. That's the disappointment. Oh, I can't even get a current temperature reading out of Google. Shows. Okay, here we go. So currently 8 degrees centigrade. Give you that in Fahrenheit. For those here, 46 Fahrenheit, 8 degrees. See, it's not that hot. It's not Cambodia. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, yeah, not hating on Alexandroupoli, but yeah. Alexandroupoli, this was this major strategic move by the United States that really matters. And I'm sure the political elite in Turkey know about it too. But it's ridiculous. We can't admit to ourselves, like we meaning Americans, I'm Canadian, but we can't admit to ourselves that Turkey really is our enemy. It's just get over it. And sorry, England also, if you don't know, sorry, you're talking about Alexandroupoli, you must be aware England has an enormous military base on the island of Cyprus. It's been there continuously for 100 years. Roughly 100 years, approximately 100 years. But England should be involved. They should be showing a lot of initiative in that conflict, and they're not. So fine. So great. As I say, I think this is ending the Ukraine part of the discussion because we have so much more to talk about with U.S. foreign policy. But Wicked Energy asks, quote, thoughts on Russian mistakes in Ukraine, tanks getting stuck in the mud, running out of fuel, etc. So I've got to tell you, Wicked Energy, I see that as 100% propaganda. Maybe this is a good transition. I see a lot of bullshit in the newspapers that reflects the fundamental fact that when you have a strategy, you don't talk about it publicly. Like normally in foreign policy, peace or war, even in times of peace, your strategy is exactly what you don't publish, what you don't tell anyone about. And, there are these newspaper stories about how amazingly effective shoulder-mounted anti-tank missiles are. Yeah? Let me tell you something. The missiles that are really effective are not in the newspapers that way. That's a propaganda. That is complete bullshit. Like, oh yeah, we have these amazing Stinger missiles. We have these amazing. Yeah, really? So there's just outright silly propaganda in the newspapers, and tanks running out of gas in the mud. Look, the reality is Russia conquered Ukraine in about a day or a day and a half. And, if they wanted to, they could have already completely demolished the capital city. They could have already completely burned Kiev to the ground. I mean, are you kidding yourself? I assume it's just for humanitarian reasons that they haven't done so. They're in a position to just set up artillery and have artillery shells, incendiary shells, raining down on Ukraine, and the city could be completely demolished. So the Russians won the war, and they won the war so rapidly that most of Western Europe was left in a state of stunned disbelief. And some tanks somewhere ran out of gas. It's totally possible that their orders were, this is normal in war. This was already normal in World War II. It's totally possible their orders were head at this bearing until you run out of gas and then set up camp there. That's normal. Tanks use a lot of gas, and then we'll send trucks to give you new fuel if and when we want to move you. But those could have been the orders to begin with. Just proceed by so many degrees north by northwest till you run out of gas. Normal in war. But yes, I also have heard some of these ridiculous stories in the newspaper about, the tremendous victories being won by the Ukrainian side. Yeah, right. Right now, which army is occupying Odessa? Okay, like take a look at, the news is admitting today that Ukraine no longer has any access to the ocean. So you have no more access to the harbor in Odessa. Who won the war? Let's get real. But look, the issue with Greece, that's obviously the future for Ukraine. I mean, if Ukraine is going to have a future independent from Russia, it would be a future integrated with Greece, period. That has to be their connection to the outside world, in terms of maritime traffic, most obviously, but also economically and culturally. Really, you'd be proposing a kind of Greco-Ukrainian alliance and integration, which, by the way, in some ways the Greeks would hate. In case you haven't heard, the Greeks hate the Macedonians. The Greeks hate the Slavs generally. It's basically just racism. It's also partly religious rivalry. So Melissa's smiling. You got it? No? I don't know. Maybe some anecdote with this, but they don't get along easily. But that's what Ukraine needs, and it's probably what the Greeks have to accept. Would be partly a strategic alliance, but also a cultural and economic alliance that really brings them together. And obviously, from my perspective, all of these people have to give up their religion and become atheists. I think it's just a joke. But Ukraine has its own independent church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and Greece has an Orthodox Church, and they don't get along. So that's a problem. Yeah. Okay.
That's just the bluntness of saying that.
Yeah. What element that they hate each other? Yeah. This ain't CNN. You will not get this level of honesty about politics on CNN. So look, certainly a segue from Ukraine. America is saying in this document that they are 100% in an alliance with India against China. Are they? Are they really? What if that's a false flag? What if that's a hollow boast? Within just the last few days, the people of the world have been asking, why does India support Russia? Just a few months ago, we were hearing all this drum beating about how India and America were now allies as never before against China. I would not say this was received with rapturous applause within India. The people of India deeply hate and resent America. Not that surprising, because America was a military opponent of India's from 1971 to 2021. Who was India's supporter and ally from 1971 to 2021? Actually started a little bit earlier than that. Russia. All right. And the alliance and military cooperation between India and Russia continued through the end of communism, the fall of the Berlin Wall, however you want to put it, right? It has basically been a continuous partnership, continuous cooperation, 1971, 2021. And the Indians are saying loud and clear right now, they want their cooperation with Russia to continue in 2022 and for the foreseeable future. So here is one striking respect in which this whole document, the official secret strategy of Joe Biden, may be complete bullshit. It may be completely misleading. It may be that the alliance between the United States and India is more seeming than real. Now, given the declaration of what's called the Quad, the Quadrilateral Alliance, however you want to put it, given the declaration of that, would it be unreasonable to expect India to be saying loudly and clearly that Russia's invasion of Ukraine is wrong and that India supports NATO, India supports the United States of America, and India supports Western European powers like Germany and France in opposing Russia's illegal and immoral expansion, conquering various parts of Ukraine? Why would that be unreasonable? Why would that be surprising? Now, I'm going to be real with you. Today, Japan is also not a very enthusiastic supporter of the United States of America. My overall feeling is Japan is frankly kind of dragging its feet. Japan, a very good example, Japan is very happy to do business with Iran. Japan and Iran have much more positive relations, much more positive cooperation, much more economic involvement than America wants them to have. And basically, right up until 2022, Japan was trying to do the same thing with Russia. They were trying to have as much positive cooperation as possible, make as much money out of it as possible. If we're being all the way honest, England, the city of London, England, deeply embedded in the Russian economy, and Russian economy was deeply embedded in the city of London. It's another, now, it may seem like the total amount of money Russia has to offer isn't that great. Let me tell you something. Downtown London, the city of London, counts for a lot. It goes a long way. Russian millionaire money goes a long way. Cyprus also, by the way, talking about Cyprus, Russians have a big impact on the economy of Cyprus. This is another example. So, it's not enormous, the Russian economy, but it can feel huge, whether you're in London, whether you're in Cyprus, or whether you are in Japan. So, the fact that India is not on America's side in Ukraine in opposing Russia, you can ask the question, does that expose the extent to which this whole document is a kind of disinformation campaign, is a kind of intentional fraud, a kind of intentional deception? But so far as this, a very different interpretation. What if this is completely earnest, but it is, as we say, aspirational? What if this is Joe Biden saying that the position he aspires to be in is having a totally positive alliance with India, where India and America are on the same side, and together they're opposing China? Very different take. Now, what this whole document avoids doing is saying that America is on the side of democracy and that it's opposing tyranny. Why would that be hard to say? Why would it be difficult to describe America's agenda under Joe Biden as being pro-democracy, anti-communism, anti-dictatorship, anti-tyranny? Why is that? Well, it's real funny. When you look at the list of allies, the list of alliances that America either actually has or that they are claiming they have. Again, on a huge scale, to what extent is America's military partnership with India just smokescreen? To what extent is it bullshit? To what extent is it not really a viable alliance? Right now, war in Ukraine exposes this, that it may be a phony or hollow or unreliable alliance. Well, also prominent on the list here is Vietnam. Again, this isn't saying aspirationally in the future, hypothetically, we'd like to be in an alliance with Vietnam against China. It's saying that it's already now an accomplished fact, right? So I ask you, I don't know, and I think this is top secret. I think really nobody in this audience can know. I think you don't know. How close are Vietnam and the United States? To what extent are Vietnam and the United States right now in a military partnership, in a strategic partner? To what extent do they have a treaty or commitment? Kamala Harris went there in person. Why? Why did Kamala Harris go to Vietnam? What document did the Vietnamese government sign, or what did they just say verbally and seal with a handshake with Kamala Harris? What was the commitment made? Let's use it. Some of these things are secret. The promises America has made to Taiwan are totally secret. Nobody knows, and nobody knows if they count for it. Whereas the promises America and England made to Ukraine were overt. They were written on paper, and guess what? They counted for nothing. Neither England nor America kept their side of the bargain when Ukraine signed that agreement to get rid of their nuclear arms in response to assurances that their territory would never be taken away from them. Someone in the audience know the exact year that agreement was. That was in the 1990s, after when communism was falling apart. The denuclearization of Ukraine involved this complex treaty in which the British and the Americans said they would basically back up Ukrainian territorial sovereignty, and the Russians said, well, they don't want they don't want to take away any land from Ukraine, so it was no problem for them. They signed it also. Since then, in Russia, things changed. But at that time, Russia was happy to make that commitment. I assume it was sincere, just for the people who were in charge in Russia at that time. They didn't think they wanted to conquer Crimea, so they handed it over. Perhaps the most telling paragraph in this document that is full of studiously opaque and misleading bafflegab is the list of America's military alliances in 2 tiers, 2 levels. It's very significant to pay attention to which names are in the second tier instead of the first tier, the lower tier instead of the top tier. And it's very significant to think about the countries that are not named at all, that are just omitted from this list. Okay, so this is overtly Joe Biden's grand strategy. We are deepening our 5 regional treaty alliances with Australia, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, and Thailand. End of list. Not India. India is not in that list. India is not in the list of countries they have a treaty alliance with. Who else is not in that list? Taiwan. Are you telling me the United States does not have a treaty alliance with Taiwan? Really? That's interesting. Now, I'm going to read you the tier 2 list, the lower tier list. Right? It's great to have 50 people in the audience. If you have a second, please hit the thumbs up button. Some of you have been here for a whole hour. Some of you just arrived. But it helps more people discover the video, both while I'm recording it. We can join in the conversation later. Please take a moment to hit the thumbs up button, guys. Here's the lower tier list. Okay. India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Mongolia. If you've been watching since the beginning, I warned you. I told you Mongolia was important, right? New Zealand, Singapore, Taiwan, Vietnam, and the Pacific Islands. Unnamed, unspecified Pacific Islands. Now, why would the Philippines be in the top tier list, right? And why would Taiwan be in the lower tier list? There are lots of countries here that aren't mentioned at all. How about Brunei? Sultan of Brunei is reading this, and he's got to worry. Which side is he on? Why does he not have a treaty alliance with America, right? There are a lot of countries, big and small. How about Nepal? If you're in Nepal, right, and you say, whoa, Mongolia is on this list, but not Nepal. Why? Okay, that matters. All right, it matters to America, it matters to China, it matters to Nepal, it matters to India. Why isn't Nepal on the list? So again, there are two tiers here. The first are treaty alliances. It is completely surreal to say there's no treaty alliance with Taiwan. What is America's status with Taiwan, if not a treaty alliance, right? So my point is, this is bullshit, but it's bullshit that matters politically. How can you say you don't have a treaty alliance with Taiwan? And conversely, how can you say that you do have a treaty alliance with the Philippines? Like, what is the definition of treaty alliance here, right? Now, again, I'm not saying there's no paperwork between America and the Philippines, but that's pretty weird. That's pretty weird. What definition are you using? You know, South Korea, I think, is self-explanatory. Not all of these. Okay, I'm sorry. Thailand? Thailand? What is the alliance you have with Thailand? Exactly. You know, I'm not saying there is no answer to this question, but this is telling you the mentality of the Biden presidency. What if right now you are a part of the government in Laos or Cambodia? You're not on the list at all. What's Cambodia's status? What's the status of Laos? There are a whole lot of countries that are going to have to ask themselves these tough questions. Okay, but the top tier is a treaty alliance, which is apparently something Taiwan doesn't have with the United States of America, but the Philippines does. Right? The lower tier is simply described as countries that America has a regional partnership with. These are regional partners. So that means nothing. That means whatever the fuck you want to say it means. So there's no treaty with India. India is only on the lower tier list of a regional partner, right? Read it again real quick. India, Indonesia, Malaysia. So let's just stop those first three. So you've been saying all this stuff about how you're in a military alliance with India against China. No, you're not. Your relationship with India is just as shaky as your relationship with Malaysia and Indonesia. So what? Malaysia and Indonesia are about 99% Muslim. I'm sorry, you can look at, maybe it's down to 98 or 97 at this point, okay? What the fuck? What really do you think is the political relationship between the United States and Malaysia? Political relationship between the United States and Indonesia? Like, are you kidding me? You think the United States has a positive relationship with any of this? And how does it compare to the Philippines? By the way, the government of the Philippines is actively involved in slaughtering Muslims on a weekly basis. If you didn't know, there's an ongoing low-level civil war within the Philippines, basically to suppress the Muslim population there. Like, how do you think Malaysia and Indonesia feels about the American military presence in the Philippines? And that, really? And you got India on the same level of partnership as Malaysia and Indonesia. Oh, hey, during the war in Afghanistan, do you remember Malaysia and Indonesia supporting the United States of America? Huh? Oh, hey, right the fuck now. Right now in Ukraine. What's Malaysia been doing in Ukraine? What is the position Malaysia and Indonesia have taken against the Russians? And what do you think they're going to do in the weeks ahead? Really? So those countries are on the same tier as India. And I've already been asked the question, what is India going to do? My answer is, I think India is trying to sustain the partnership, the cooperation they've had with Russia, really since before 1971. But 1971 was a turn point where it became much more important because India and the United States became enemies. Okay? So this level, we have, again, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Mongolia. Mongolia, very interesting political chessboard. Okay? New Zealand, Singapore, Taiwan, Vietnam, and the Pacific Islands. What's going to happen in the next 5 years? And again, Joe Biden has had the luxury of saying that his agenda is to be pro-democracy and anti-dictatorship, pro-democracy, anti-communism, pro-democracy, anti-tyranny. This document does not say that. This document says loud and clear that Joe Biden is anti-China and that he is willing to support and he is willing to get into bed with any other country that is anti-China, no matter how despicable. Is Vietnam a democracy? How democratic really is Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines? Really? So it's not about being pro-democracy. That's a choice. That's a choice Joe Biden made, right? And now we're all going to deal with the consequences for the next 10 years, 20 years, whatever it proves to be. Certainly. I mean, I think the next president of the United States after Joe Biden will also be a Democrat. I don't think Joe Biden is going to run for a second term of office just because of his old age. But whether it's Kamala Harris or someone else, I think we're going to see Joe Biden's legacy continue on. Now, quote, through our diplomatic engagement, foreign assistance, and work with regional organizations, the United States will be a partner in strengthening democratic institutions, the rule of law, and accountable democratic governance. Close quote. Hong Kong, what are you going to do? Nothing. Myanmar, what are you going to do? Nothing, right? So there are a lot of big questions here. Now, look, again, I'm also open to talking about countries like Nepal. Nepal has a significant amount of democracy. Iran. There are a lot of countries. Iran is partly democratic. Like they do have elections, and they have newspapers that can talk about politics. There are a lot of these countries that are somewhat democratic, where it's more nuanced. Okay, but Myanmar and Hong Kong, these are really clear tests for American foreign policy, and frankly, the Taiwan versus communist China, which, by the way, I'll get there. Hashtag spoilers. This document takes the most immoral position, the most hypocritical position on Taiwan possible. Joe Biden didn't have to do that. There's no pressure on it. Okay. So, here is a sentence that matters a great deal to everyone, every country I've just listed off in this document, including even Indonesia and Malaysia. Quote, in particular, we will build support for rules-based approaches to the maritime domain, including in the South China Sea and East China Sea. So it's clear as mud. There were a few other passages that say the same thing without any greater specificity or clarity. But this basically means they're going to fight against China's claim to the South China Sea, China's claim to control the South China Sea, the so-called 9-dash line map, which is also referred to as the 7-dash line map and the 11-dash line map. It's all the same map. But China's claims to the South China Sea displayed on a map with some number of dashes in the line. So crucially, now again, on a very separate page, it completely vaguely states that America is in this partnership to support the rise of India and India's regional leadership, and that they've formed this alliance called the Quad, which exists, obviously I'm rephrasing, to oppose China's government, to oppose China's dominance and to support an increased role for India, right? Interesting, but this may really be disinformation. This may really be just what America wants China to hear, and there may not be any underlying reality to the supposed alliance with India. Quote, the United States will continue to stand up for democracy in Burma, working closely with allies and partners to press the Burmese military to provide for a return to democracy, including through credible implementation of the 5-point consensus. I interpret that to mean America is going to do nothing for Myanmar. I think that is a polite way of saying it. And it is interesting that you would declare this openly in a so-called strategy of this kind. Most shockingly, this document states, with no pressure on the American government to do this, that the United States of America supports the one China policy, which is to say that they support the notion that Taiwan is not now and never will be an independent country, that that Taiwan is just a province of China. The one China policy means that you do not recognize Taiwanese sovereignty. You do not recognize that Taiwan is now, or could be, or should be in the future, a separate country. That Taiwan is just an eccentric province of communist China. I have no idea why he said that. Nobody forced him into a corner to do so. I don't need to quote the text. It just states bluntly, out of the blue, that the United States of America still supports one China policy on Taiwan. Okay, hold on, let's search the PDF here and get the exact wording. Here we go, quote. So Melissa, if you want to look, it's on page 13. The top of page 13. Oh. We quote, "We will also work with partners inside and outside of the region to maintain peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, including by supporting Taiwan's self-defense capabilities to ensure an environment in which Taiwan's future is determined peacefully in accordance with the wishes and best interests of Taiwan's people." Why didn't you use the word democracy? I don't know. Why didn't you use the word communism too? This is anti-communism. Okay. I continue, quote, "As we do so, our approach remains consistent with our one China policy and our long-standing commitments under the Taiwan Relations Act, the 3 joint communiques, and the 6 assurances." So that is totally bizarre. I have no idea why in the year 2022, Joe Biden or anyone else would say they support the one China policy. I don't. Do you? Who the hell would support the one China policy? I think it would have been much better to say the exact opposite, to say the one China policy is a fossil that should be put in a museum and it should have no significance, should have no meaning in politics today. That Taiwan already is an independent country and that everyone should recognize that and everyone should support Taiwan in its struggle against Chinese communist dictatorship. Given that the whole document's major thesis is that America is now and forever in the future part of this grand world-spanning anti-China alliance. An anti-China alliance that is so important, apparently, that Russia is just a footnote to a footnote in it. I mean, there's no interest in Russia in this document. And there could be. I mean, I know, even though the title is that it's the Indo-Pacific one, still, you could have several paragraphs in there, or you could have a major thesis about how Russia fits into that. Because guess what? Russia also controls a significant part of the Pacific coastline. In case you didn't know, Russia goes all the way to, it controls part of northern Japan, as has been mentioned. Well, Russia is a Pacific power too. Russia is there in the Indo-Pacific, and Russia has its own policy in Myanmar and Cambodia and everywhere else. They're very much a palpable presence. So, Joe Biden's thesis here is that the immediate future of the United States of America is a struggle against China, period, and that they're willing to be allies with Vietnam, and they're willing to ignore the lack of democracy in Myanmar, frankly, the lack of democracy in places like the Philippines and numerous other partners. They don't care about anything else. They're willing to work with anyone who will join their anti-China alliance. And Russia is a footnote to a footnote in this grand strategy. Maybe it's all bullshit. In a sense, I kind of hope so. But sadly, I suspect that this really is, earnestly enough, Joe Biden's strategy. And also it states his aspirations, that it's an aspirational document. This is what he wants his relationship with India to be. It's what he wants his relationship with Vietnam to be, so on and so forth. And it's possible that some of the countries who are slighted in this, that it's actually trying to excite their jealousy. Like you're trying to say to Nepal, look, if you want to be on the same level, you have to step up. You have to make an effort to justify being a strategic partner of the United States. It's possible there's some jiggery pokery going on that way. Okay, guys, I'm going to wrap it up. But right now is a great time to make a comment that I'll actually read and respond to. Now is a great time to hit the thumbs up button. By all means, share the link share the link to this video with any friends or family you have who will be horrified to hear this, because it is horrifying. It is. Melissa, if you want to add anything, if you want to object, you may do so. Let me just ask whether you were Japanese or Burmese or Iranian or any other nationality. If you're looking at this from the outside, why should Japan support the United States if the United States is not going to unambiguously support democracy in Taiwan? Why would that be too much to ask from the United States? Why would that be too much to ask back, especially given that it doesn't cost America anything? Conquering Afghanistan cost you a lot of money. It really did. It's unfathomable how much money Obama wasted in Afghanistan. And by the way, I'm saying Obama because if you look at the budget totals, Obama spent vastly more money than George W. Bush did in that same war. Unbelievable. Okay. Well, it costs you nothing. Why can't you have an America that stands up for democracy in Myanmar, in Hong Kong, in Mongolia, in Taiwan? And if the United States of America doesn't stand up for any of these things, what then? What is this alliance we're supporting? And why? Because there would be advantages to getting along with China or supporting China to some extent, including obviously economic advantages. There's a lot of money involved. What is it that you're asking the allies to support? Now, look, I care a lot about politics in Thailand. I used to talk about it more on the channel. Thailand has a very tenuous and difficult relationship to democracy. I think it's fair to say Thailand is a country that struggles to sustain democracy. Why can't America have a really strident, passionate position on democracy in Thailand? It wouldn't cost them anything. Where, they say, hey, we support the democracy you have now. We want you to be even more democratic. We want you to improve and move in that direction. And instead, America's this very cagey, detached, and distant attitude towards Thailand when it has repeatedly lapsed in and out of periods of military dictatorship, of having, at least formally, no democracy at all. So Joe Biden has taken up a position that is both impolitic and unstrategic. It's both immoral and ineffective. I don't think he's playing to win, and he's also not playing to be right, like morally. It's a very strange position he's adopted. I have no reason to think Japan will really support America in this. I have no reason to think India will really support America in this. And you have to ask, from the Japanese perspective or the Indian perspective, what's in it for us? What's in it for me? Why should we? Now, let's come back to Turkey. Where was Turkey mentioned in this document? I think I can check right now. I think Turkey is not mentioned even once. I think Turkey's name does not appear in this document. You are expecting right now, I'm just doing a search, you are expecting the Turks, nope, Turkey's name does not appear, neither as an adjective nor as a noun. You are expecting the Turks to support the American empire, U.S. foreign policy. What's in it for them? So obviously we can give a complex answer. We started to trace that out. But this is the deal. And America is going around the world to these junkets, and they're saying, sign up now to support this. Unfortunately, it raises some really difficult questions, and it doesn't provide the answers, precisely the answers it should be giving. Instead, you get a lot of bafflegab about how America is going to support a free and open economy in Asia. Well, if I lose the ability to trade with China and I lose the ability to trade with Russia and to have investment both ways, with China and Russia, that's not actually a free and open economy. Like, if you ask a country like Laos, Cambodia, Thailand to cut off trade with China, that's not a free and open economy. That's a pro-American embargo, an anti-China embargo that will have devastating, serious effects on the local economy for any of those countries. I mean, China is a huge percentage of the world's economy, but it's a huge percentage of Thailand's economy. It's an even bigger percentage of Thailand's economy, right? Now the Vietnamese may be down for it. The Vietnamese intensely hate China. There's a deep, slightly racist hatred between the Vietnamese and Chinese. It runs deep. There's a lot of real animosity there. Guess who else the Vietnamese hate? The Americans. I mean, so you're trying to entice the Vietnamese into supporting this in the name of this very vague notion, free trade in the South Pacific, meaning trade with America. Well, that is simply not very convincing a case. So yeah, it's strange. I think that Joe Biden. Oh, I can argue against my. I'll read your comments in a second, guys. If you want to make a comment now, if you want to give a thumbs up now, it's a good time. I will argue against my position and say the sense in which Joe Biden is right. But obviously, my first and most fundamental reaction to this is to look at the extent to which and the ways in which Joe Biden is wrong. As I say, both morally and strategically, this seems to me a step in the wrong direction. I think he's undermining what were maybe some of the good ideas that were unveiled in the first few months of his presidency. No mention of Saudi Arabia. I could just check. How does Saudi Arabia fit into this? One of the most powerful countries in the world. No mention of Iran. I'll just search. I think Iran might get a brief mention in there as being part of the problem. Let me just check. No. So the whole document, no mention of Saudi Arabia, no mention of Iran. The name of Thailand appears 3 times, by contrast. Not a single mention of Saudi Arabia, not a single mention of Iran. Of course, those matter, I know, but Iran matters. I'm sorry, but specifically trade between Iran and everyone in this part of the world matters. But no, Iran. I mean, sorry. In this, okay, let me just say this: from Donald Trump's perspective, Iran is more important in the Asian policy than China. And from an American perspective, how much more important is China than Iran? They're both major foreign policy priorities or concerns. And, certainly also, I think it's conspicuous to what extent is North Korea just ignored, I will quote you what it says about North Korea. Isn't this cynical? It's not well written, by the way. The quality of writing is poor. Quote, "The COVID-19 pandemic continues to inflict a painful human and economic toll across the region. The Democratic People's Republic of Korea, DPRK, that means North Korea, that means communist North Korea, continues to expand its illicit nuclear weapons and missile programs. Indo-Pacific governments grapple with natural disasters, resource scarcity, internal conflict, governance challenges." So DPRK, North Korea, is just mentioned here in passing as one of the problems in the region. We then have later, this is page 13, same page I was quoting earlier, quote, "As the DPRK continues to develop destabilizing nuclear and missile programs, we will continue to seek sustained and serious dialogue with the goal of the complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and addressing its ongoing human rights violations and improving the lives and livelihoods of the North Korean people. At the same time, we are strengthening extended deterrence and coordination with South Korea, ROK, and Japan to respond to North Korean provocations, remaining prepared to deter and, if necessary, defeat any aggression towards the United States and our allies, while bolstering counter-proliferation efforts throughout the region." So you have a shrinking of the North Korean problem to being nuclear missiles. The problem with North Korea is democracy, the lack of democracy, right? Why not say that? Why not say we support Taiwan because it's a democracy, we support Japan because it's a democracy. In the future, we want North Korea to be a democracy just like Japan, just like Taiwan. That's your agenda. Why do you pretend that your role is purely this crisis management defensive role of saying, well, we're going to manage the hostility of the DPRK of North Korea? So yeah, I think that's a fundamentally cowardly thing. What do you say?
I just find it interesting that they say they will work with a wide set of actors, including our
Yes.
rivals, to prevent and manage crises. That was the next sentence.
Yeah, okay. Good one. Let's add that.
That was just the next sentence.
No, you're right. It's a great quote to lift. Again, page 13. While reinforcing extended deterrence against nuclear and ballistic missile systems and other emerging threats to strategic stability, the United States will seek to work with a wide set of actors, including our rivals, to prevent and manage crises. So the myth being prevented there, the lie being prevented to you, is that now, in 2022, America is going to be able to cooperate with Russia, and America is going to be able to cooperate with China to suppress North Korean belligerence. That's not true. Are you fucking kidding me? Kidding me? Sorry, but mail that to 1995. I mean, it was true at one point. If you go back far enough, that was true that Russia, China, and America were all on the same side in managing the insanity of the North Korean dictatorship. But today, this is fantasy, and it's also, again, it's strategically inept. It's also just totally immoral. This is not. Back in the old days, they used to call them the five-party talks, right? I think so. The five parties were China, America, Russia, South Korea, North Korea. Five-party talks. Those days are gone. Okay, so quote from Alec in the audience. Alec's a longtime viewer of the channel. Quote, I guess they can say they think China and Taiwan should eventually be one country, but not until both sides are democracies, ? They could say that. They never say that. Now, Alec, what if I repeat your statement and I replace the word Taiwan with Hong Kong? Hong Kong used to be a democracy. China snuffed out democracy in Hong Kong to some extent gradually, to some extent suddenly over recent years. If you've been reading the news in the last 10, 20 years, you will have heard about this process. As I say, I was in Hong Kong when they had just had the handover ceremonies so many years ago when I was a boy. Anyway, I saw the fireworks on the ground. The ashes of the fireworks were still on the ground from the handover ceremonies when I was there. I wasn't there for the festivities. I was there right after the handover ceremonies had taken place when Hong Kong became part of Chinese jurisdiction. What if you were instead saying that China and Hong Kong should eventually be one country, but not until both are democracies? That would be a very powerful statement for America to make. You could make that an American federal law or a policy, or you could state it in the treaty. You could write a treaty with Taiwan. Say, look, we support you eventually becoming part of China, but only this. But guys, it's bullshit. And this is 2022. Here's a different perspective, Alec. Sorry, I'm not saying this to insult you. I'm just here's a contrasting perspective. What if America's policy was that really Taiwan and Japan should be part of the same country? That there should be a federal government uniting the democracies of East Asia, Japan, Taiwan, Samoa, throw in a few of the Pacific Islands. Should have a Pacific Democratic Federal Union for their mutual defense and economic benefit. That you should have an EU of East Pacific, South Pacific. Tonga. Not enough people talk about the politics of Tonga. For real. Obviously, Australia could be part of it, or Australia could be out of it. It'd be an interesting question. But why would you want Taiwan to be part of the same country as communist China? Instead, it could be, in the past it could be part of a union of some kind with Japan. That'd be better for everyone. By the way, I actually almost broke down weeping when I saw this in Taiwan. I was alone at that time. I just mean physically, Melissa wasn't standing there with me. But I remember I was walking down the street there. I'd have to really remember when this was. And there was this small office set into a wall. And so in Taiwan, anything can be a political party. That's true in many countries. But many political movements in Taiwan register as a political party. I'd assume they're tax benefits or something. I don't know that. But, so instead of just being like in America, they might be a PAC. They might be a political action committee. They might be registered. They'll actually register as a party. But there was this political organization, and it was this organization, and what they were arguing for was honesty about the fact that what is in Taiwan's interest is to embrace the United States of America and embrace Japan. To say openly, the situation of Taiwan is that we are in an alliance with America and Japan, not China. And evidently, it was founded by military veterans. Again, I was there. I was literally reading their propaganda. I was standing there looking at, and they put openly. They had the flag of Taiwan, the flag of Japan, and the flag of the United States together, and said like something like we are brothers, or we are one brother. Like, we have to recognize this is our current situation, and this is what is in our interest. Like, and it was a real argument, because it was saying stop hating America, stop hating Japan, and within Taiwan there's a lot of hatred against both. I remember, sorry, as I say, I almost wept, because it was very moving to see what they were saying. And I'm someone who's very involved in politics, and it really was saying, let's get rid of all this propaganda, let's get rid of all these lies, let's work with the reality situation as it is. So, I just don't see any sense to the one China policy whatsoever in the year 2022. We can debate, did it make sense in 1955 or 1965? Probably, I would say no to that also, but certainly today. I mean, regardless, whether or not, if we did the research and thought about it hypothetically, what would your position be in 1965? Different question. But today, no, there's just no point in talking about a one China policy for Taiwan. Even though I know, I've lived with the culture enough. I feel the gravitas that Chineseness has for the Taiwanese people. And, I feel also the intensity of their emotions about Japan, which are truly ambivalent. They feel a powerful sense of attraction toward Japan, and they also feel repulsion. There's both. Okay. Irrelevant question, but perfectly reasonable one. Someone asked my opinion on the drug war. I've done so many videos on that. Sorry, I just don't want to search now and get you the link, but I have done many videos talking about drug policy in America, in Europe, even in Asia, actually, talking about illegal drugs and what political policy should be. So I have made many, many videos talking about that at length and in depth, if you look around for them on the channel. Okay, so guys, I end the video by returning to some of the major leitmotifs in brief. I made this 2-minute long video on the channel. If you didn't see it before, I'd encourage you to see it for the first time. And I'll stick with that error. I'd encourage you to see it now, whether you're seeing it for the first time or whether you're seeing it for the second time, and think about the very simple message that I'm putting across here. Wouldn't the world be a different place if the United States of America could say, we have democracy and you don't? Wouldn't the world be a different place if the United States could say, hey, right or wrong, we started the invasion of Afghanistan because the American people voted in a referendum. They had some kind of direct democracy, some kind of decision-making process. We could say, look, the American people voted to begin the war in Afghanistan, and then maybe 5 years later or maybe 10 years later, they had another vote to end the war in Afghanistan. We have democracy, and this is how decisions are made in the United States of America. That's not the situation America is in, okay? The reality is that while Donald Trump was president of the United States, the decision to start a war or the decision to end a war was entirely in the power of just one man who had all the powers of a king for the period he was elected to serve in office for 4 years. Call it an electoral dictatorship or an electoral monarchy. And it was terrifying, right? And we look across the ocean to Russia, and we can only say sympathetically, we understand that you are in this situation now too. The Russian people did not have a referendum. They did not have a vote. They did not have any democracy about whether or not to invade the Ukraine or whatever is going to happen next. They have no power over what happened in the past and what happened next. So it's really sort of sad the extent to which there is a mirror-like similarity between the semi-democracy of the United States and the pseudo-democracy of China and the deeply corrupt democracy of Russia. Because they do have some elections, they do have some voting, they do have some capacity for the newspapers to criticize the people in power. Some, not enough, but they have some. And as I say, this is even true when you look at Iran and Egypt, to give examples. Those are countries that have some democracy. When you look into it, it's interesting to kind of evaluate how much or how little democracy there is. Now, again, that video, it's only 2 minutes long. It very briefly indicates to you that the last time this issue was taken seriously, the issue of whether or not Americans should directly vote in referendums to decide the beginnings and endings of wars, whether or not the most fateful decisions in foreign policy should be decided through direct democracy. It was the period from World War I through to the beginning of World War II. And I think it's fair to say that Americans were terrified by the possibility that there were enough Nazis within the United States of America that America would not have entered World War II if you had this kind of direct democracy. It's a complete fiction. It's a complete delusion. As year after year went by with Adolf Hitler leading up to the start of World War II, but I mean, long before, Hitler invades the Czech Republic, American sympathy for, American tolerance for, and the American willingness to placate Hitler, it was going down and down. I think it's true if you look at polls, kind of the day when Hitler's just first coming into power. I think there were at that time Americans who said, look, they still could remember World War I, and they just don't want to get involved in another war in Europe. To call this pacifism is misleading. To call it isolationism is misleading. I think there is no truth at all to the notion that Americans would not have voted to go to war, even once that war involved the Czech Republic, but certainly once the war involved England, France, etc. Of course, Americans would have voted to enter into World War II. So I think that is ridiculous. However, I think that really is the ghost haunting American politics, is the awareness, because America is a country predominantly of immigrants. A tiny percentage of the country is the indigenous people. And if you were living in Manhattan at that time, you would have really seen that there were a lot of Italians. And those Italians still had sympathies for and supported, to some extent, Mussolini in Italy, right? So it was very palpable that there were Nazis and there were fascists. To some extent, there were Spaniards, and possibly Hispanic people from South America too, who sympathized or supported fascism in Spain. Now, there were also a lot of people who opposed fascism in Spain and supported democracy in Spain, or anarchism in Spain, or communism in Spain. It was a very divisive civil war, the Spanish Civil War. But nevertheless, fascism in Spain, there were these strong feelings. I can really understand how people living through that time may have had an exaggerated awareness of the minority of Americans who were vocally pro-fascist in general, again, whether that's Italy or Spain, and of the minority of Americans who were specifically pro-German, pro-Nazi, willing to. I get that. I think that has shocked America for 50 years into refusing to think seriously about the role of democracy in questions of war and peace, questions of alliances, and questions of actual invasion. But I can tell you about a whole bunch of wars that never would have happened if you just had this amendment to the Constitution so that people would vote in a referendum before invading another country, before occupying another country, before beginning outright war. Okay? And there are even more wars that would have ended earlier, that wouldn't have gone on for 20 years, that would have ended earlier. Even if Americans would have voted to start it, they would have also, after 5 years or something, voted to stop it. Say, okay, enough already. America invaded, conquered, and ruled Haiti. Why? Nobody in America today can tell you why. America's history of military incursions into Haiti, no one can explain. Now, conversely, just to give an example that's juxtaposed, look at Cuba right next door. Why hasn't America invaded Cuba? Why hasn't America gotten rid of communism in Cuba and created democracy there? Like, both examples are absurd. Like, The fact that America did conquer Haiti and the fact that America didn't conquer Cuba. I mean, still today, right now in 2022, how about a war to liberate Cuba? Why not? If you voted for it, what percentage of Americans would support that? Right? The American conquest of the Philippines. Why? Who in America would have voted for that? Most absurd, totally immoral war. Totally pointless. Nothing to win, everything to lose. Why did America conquer the Philippines? What was the point? And, it may well be, like, if you get into reading the private letters of politicians at the time, there could have been American politicians who wanted the Philippines to become a permanent part of the United States the way Hawaii has. Why did America conquer and annex Hawaii? In that case, it was more annexation than conquest. I'm being transparent with you. America did not conquer Hawaii in the same sense that America conquered Haiti, in the same sense America conquered the Philippines. It's not a fair comparison. Nevertheless, the annexation of Hawaii, eventually leading to the statehood of Hawaii. Who in their right mind would have voted for that? And if you think that didn't matter, if you think that didn't have political consequences, for example, in World War II, it really did. It really matters. It's not a minor footnote in the history of the United States of America. These are questions Americans could have voted on directly. And imagine how much safer you would have felt during the presidency of Donald Trump if you knew that he could not start a war with Iran without first putting it to a plebiscite, without first putting it to a referendum, without first having a direct vote. So, more democracy within the United States of America. It will not, in a simplistic sense, mean world peace. It won't, okay? It will mean escalating levels of political education within the United States, escalating levels of political engagement, and it will mean more mobilization of people, more motivation for people to know and understand and care about the wars that you have. And I think it will result in Americans fighting different wars.